In this symposium, of course, the audience learn about the performance of the FEMTIS intraocular lens. We also have shared the advantages of the other Teleon multifocal implant. They have a better understanding of the performance of these various lenses, all come from Teleon as well.
With the new EDOFs, the monofocal plus lenses, the torics, the multifocals, the trifocals, they are very sensitive to the position of the lens in the eye. It's very important to have an automated CCC. They help in achieving an excellent and stable effective lens position. And they've also shown to reduce the rates of PCO. So hence, with this, long-term visual and refractive outcomes of the patients are expected to be more stable, and thus we are going to have happy patients in the long term.
We can basically improve on our outcomes on current cataract surgery by reducing unwanted side effects. And I think by clipping the lens to the anterior capsule, we can get rid of that completely for our patients. I think that first thing is to acknowledge that these things do exist, and we do see this amongst patients, and this is after routine surgery. So it's like, you've done a good job, you haven't broken the capsule, you put the lens out the bag, yet you still get this complication. So identification of this as a problem and understanding this is what the patients are complaining about, and acknowledging that, I think, is important. That's the first thing. The second thing is that basically understanding what the solutions are to basically try to prevent this. And the third thing really is that you've always got to think, what about the other eye? Because people always get a bit of fears. If you have a complication like this in one eye, what am I going to do with another eye? And a lot of people say, I don't want you to do it until this is basically sorted out. And I think now with this sort of anterior clipping technology, you can basically have a solution for doing the other eye surgery.
In my opinion, definitely customized IOL will produce the best outcome as compared to any conventional toric IOL. It's specially designed for a particular patient to get the best outcome from the surgery. Definitely is the future of a toric implant.
As the doctors and the patients themselves realize that it is available, it's the patient base themselves that we're going to ask for it. And they're going to say, I want something that will make me spectacle-free. And that's going to push people to start using customized toric implants in the future.
Right, just firstly a brief introduction about today's symposium. Teleon is actually a very unique company in coming out with these unique designs of intraocular lens. It is a bifocal, multifocal implant. And it has actually a series and full range of lenses that cover from, monofocal EDOF intraocular lens, as well as a multifocal that allow patient to have a good intermediate or a good far and intermediate. You have option to for good far, near, and intermediate, as well and far and near type of lenses. Because the design is so unique, it's segmental. It is one of the multifocal in the market that come with very high contrast sensitivity. I have some experience. I have actually quite a lot of experience in using these lenses. And I can only say from my personal experience, most patients are actually very happy with the outcome of these lenses because of the contrast and also the performance of the lens. This is a symposium whereby they are actually pushing the design and also the lenses that can even do better for the patients in a number of ways. Customized design of the lens, a lens that's specifically designed to be used together with FLACS for higher accuracy and precisions, as well as, of course, sharing on the quality and performance of the Teleon lens. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, who is Dr. Sheetal Brar. Yeah. She is a senior consultant and a research director at the Netra Dharma Eye Hospital, Bangalore, India. Welcome, Dr. Sheetal. Please welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Chu, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be talking about high-precision cataract surgery, what are its options and advantages, and specifically, I'll be discussing about auto capsulotomy or auto CCC. the technology overview, its advantages over manual capsulotomy. So as we all know, the various technological advancements that have been continuously happening in the field of cataract surgery have literally transformed the procedure into a refractive procedure. A continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis, or the CCC, is the most widely considered the most important step for consistent and predictable outcomes, because depending upon your CCC size and position, the lens position also depends. So that's very important for the effective lens position. And the various notable advancements in IOL technology related to advanced optics and materials. So nowadays we are having presbyopia correcting lenses, multifocals, toric. So it's very important to achieve a stable lens position at the end of the surgery, for which capsulotomy is very important. And these have further heightened the importance of capsulotomy during phacoemulsification. So as we all know, the ideal anterior capsulotomy should be circular, of an accurate size of 5 to 5.5 millimeters, so that we can get a good overlap of the optic rim. So this should be centered on the patient's visual axis and should achieve a 360 degrees rim to optic coverage, and must also have adequate capsular edge strength. If the capsulotomy is poorly sized, it can consequently lead to IOL malposition, which could be in the form of IOL tilt or decentration, which can affect the quality of vision due to increased higher order aberrations, and it can also lead to higher rates of PCO formations. So challenges with manual capsulotomy, the biggest challenge is that it is not always reproducible and consistent, and it needs much higher degree of skill and experience. It is also based on surgeon's judgment, and the position and shape of the capsulotomy are the function of various factors such as pupil dilatation, Purkinje images, grade of cataract. Based on all these factors, the surgeon decides where to make the capsulorhexis, how big it should be. All these can actually influence the creation of a capsulotomy. Now, what is the need for automated capsulotomy technology? Why do we need these technologies? So again, as I said, we have premium lenses nowadays, torics, multifocals, extended depth of focal lenses, which offer increased spectacle independence compared to monofocal lenses. But very important thing about these lenses is that they are very sensitive to alignment, position, and centration. So if a multifocal lens or a toric multifocal lens decenters in the post-op period, it will lead to higher order aberrations such as coma and affect the quality of vision. It can increase the post-op dysphotopsias and the contrast sensitivity. So you'll have unhappy patients. So this is why there is definitely, in the modern cataract surgery era, we need automated capsulotomy technologies. So the advantages of these technologies would be, they provide perfect IOL centration with good overlap with the optic rim, maintaining a stable position, thus having a minimal effect on the effective lens position in the long term, reproducible and repeatable results, safe in complex cases. So many times our cases are complex, mature cataracts, intumescent cataracts, cases with pseudo-exfoliation. In these cases, again, it's difficult to get a perfect manual capsulotomy. So automated capsulotomy technologies are of great help in these scenarios, and they also reduce chances of PCO. So FLACS, or femtolaser assisted cataract surgery, as we all know, has challenged the place of manual CCC as the gold standard by theoretically offering more consistency, circularity, and centration. So definitely FLACS has been a revolutionary technology that has changed the face of cataract surgery by giving us, by standardizing this very important step of cataract surgery, which is capsulotomy. And no matter what is the case, whatever you feed in the laser, the machine will certainly give you. So that's why the FLACS technology has become quite popular. However, the adoption of this technology is still nominal because of the issues of affordability and also compromised workflow to some extent. However, FLACS has definitely highlighted the value of an automated capsulotomy, as there are numerous studies which are published that have demonstrated improved accuracy for centration, size, and circularity. So this was a study by Tackman et al., published in JCRS, and the authors showed that the mean deviation in the laser group for capsulotomy from the target was 0.16 millimeters versus manual capsulotomy, wherein the mean deviation was 0.42 millimeters, and this difference was statistically significant. The authors concluded that laser anterior capsulotomy created a more precise capsule opening than CCC, and the buttons created by the laser procedure were easy to remove at the beginning of the cataract surgery. This was another study which was published, and in the 18-month data, the authors showed that femtocapsulotomy showed higher stability and circularity with less PCO compared to manual CCC. Now, this is another study where the authors concluded that femtocapsulotomy showed better circularity, more predictable size, IOL centration, as well as refractive results compared to manual CCC at the end of 24 months. Capsular edge strength is a slightly controversial topic here. There are some studies which show that the manual capsulotomy has a stronger edge, and there are some studies which show that femtocapsulotomy has enough strength. This particular feature is very important because nowadays we have capsulotomy fixation lenses. So these lenses are fixated onto the capsulotomy, so it is very important for the capsulotomy to have adequate strength and also to prevent the risk of radial anterior tears that can extend posteriorly and lead undesirable complications. So this was a study performed on porcine eyes, and in this study the authors found that the strength of the laser capsulotomy was significantly better. The capsulotomy was precise, accurate, reproducible, and stronger than those created with conventional manual techniques. However, the strength of the laser capsulotomy decreased with increasing pulse energy. So when they increased the pulse energy for the capsulotomy, the strength reduced. So what it concluded that if you use less amount of pulse energy for the capsulotomy, you will have a stronger edge. Now, there are various femtolaser platforms available in the cataract surgery market today. So most of these platforms, they have the capsulotomy depth settings of minimum of 200 microns to a maximum of 1,500 microns. So we have the LENSAR laser system in our hospital, and the limit of capsulotomy depth with this machine is 400 to 1,500 microns. So you can, depending upon the case, select what depth you need. In our hospital, for most of our cases, we use 1,000 micron as a standard depth. So you can see with this laser, we get almost every time 100% free floating capsulotomy. So on the left side, we have a very soft cataract, and you can see how easily the capsulotomy comes in the phaco probe. There are no adhesions or attachments. On the right side, I have a case which is mature, intumescent, and very hard cataract. And in this case as well, we are able to achieve a perfectly free floating capsulotomy. So it's very important to optimize the laser, of course, that the company does. So in our system, our machine, the edge height of the capsulotomy is set at 1 millimeters or 1,000 microns. The shot or spot spacing is 4 microns, and the laser energy works best at 5 millijoules. I just had a first-hand experience on this lens, the FEMTIS lens from Teleon Surgicals. So more is coming on this lens by Dr. Jod Mehta. So this particular lens, you can see in this case that this lens actually has 4 haptics, the 2 routine and the regular haptics. Hydrophilic haptics are the plate haptics, and then it also has 4 extra haptics. 2 haptics are these flap-like haptics, which you need to bring it over the capsulotomy edge at 6 and 12 o'clock position, and the smaller haptics you just need to adjust over the capsulotomy edge. So in this way, the lens fixes onto the rim of the capsulotomy. And you can see at the time of this maneuvering, there was no stress on the capsulotomy and no radial tears of capsulotomy were observed. So this shows that the capsulotomy achieved with laser, femtolaser, is strong enough. So as I said, we get free floating capsulotomies facilitated by lens tilt compensation. This laser also has a special feature of IntelliAxis, wherein for toric lenses, it provides 2 notches on the steep axis based on iris registration for toric lenses, as well as arcuate incision placement. So coming to the other technologies which are available, the Zepto Precision Pulse Capsulotomy, or the PPC, was FDA approved in 2017, and this consists of a small console connected to a disposable handpiece with a low profile silicon suction shell containing a flexible nitinol ring that delivers thermoelectric energy. So once this shell, it creates 360-degree apposition with the capsule, it releases quick pulse of energy to produce cleavage of the anterior capsule with a resultant round capsulotomy of about 5.2 millimeters in diameter. So the advantages of this technology over FLACS basically are that it does not require additional space in your OR. The time taken for capsulotomy is shorter, less than 5 milliseconds. It can be seamlessly introduced into the normal operating sequence, and of course the cost is comparatively less, and this is why it is also popularly known as poor man's femto. And there are some studies published with this technology, and early experience has shown favorable, consistent results with potential value in complex cases. However, there have been reports of radial tears and incomplete capsulotomies with the use of this device that prompts improvements and further modifications in the technology. And there are also certain user-dependent factors identified that can contribute to the success of completion of the capsulotomy with this technology. And additional studies still are required to further evaluate the performance of this device. Then we come to capsular or selective laser capsulotomy. Now, this is a new technology which is currently under investigation. It's right now not available in the market. However, it takes the advantage of the established FLACS technology to create an anterior capsulotomy in a more efficient capacity with a transportable attachment to the surgical microscope. So basically, the laser is delivered through a transportable attachment on the surgical microscope. So in contrast to FLACS, however, the laser energy is continuous rather than the pulsed. So this is how it kind of works. So you first need to apply trypan blue and to stain the anterior capsule. And then the laser projects a reticule as a guide for centration, which is adjustable from 4.5 to 7 millimeters diameters. Followed by this, laser is fired and capsulotomy occurs with laser energy absorption of the dye-stained anterior capsule. The flap can then be removed out of the eye. So this is one publication with this technology which shows that in addition to the advantages related to the efficiency, the authors demonstrated that SLC may provide a more stabilized, strengthened anterior capsule compared to manual CCC and FLACS. So this is another technology which is under investigation, aperture continuous thermal capsulotomy, or the CTC, from International Biomedical Devices. So this is another option on the horizon that is currently undergoing preclinical testing, is not commercially available yet. So this consists of a small console that delivers thermal energy through a steel ring-shaped cutting element. So once a 360-degree contact with the anterior capsule is created, thermal energy is delivered that melts the collagen on the anterior capsule to create the capsulotomy. So to conclude, quick and precise and reproducible capsulotomies continue to be sought after by surgeons for optimized outcomes without sacrificing time and efficiency. There is certainly a trend towards a guided or automated approach for improved reproducibility and precision, particularly with IOLs with advanced optics and the premium IOLs. However, there is no clear evidence to support whether these automated approaches do lead to superior outcomes or not. However, as new devices are introduced, comparative studies would be helpful to evaluate the performance and determine whether their improved geometry would translate into meaningful benefits for patients or not. However, in my experience of using FLACS since past almost 10 years, I have seen that the confidence that you have, especially while performing your premium IOL cases, that you are definitely going to get a well-centered, perfect capsulotomy and a free-floating capsulotomy all the times. It just makes you feel very confident while performing your surgery and in achieving good results for your patients. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to thank Teleon for the kind invitation to talk in the symposium. So I'll just give you some overviews about the lenses that are available and some situations where I use this lens, and I'll show you some clinical examples from this itself. And I'll explain to you why I basically use this platform for this technology. So let's just go back a little bit. Okay. So Harold Ridley, of course, was the first person to implant an intraocular lens at St. Thomas's Hospital. I was lucky enough to be a medical student there, and this used to be outside the halls of residence where I used to basically live. And if you look at the initial outcomes from the surgery, the residual refractive error was quite high, right? You can see almost basically like -20. Some patients had to go a lens exchange. The second patient had to undergo a lens exchange as well. And of course, we've seen massive improvement from that first surgical procedure that was basically done in 1950. In the 80s, of course, we got better with IOL constant powers, but you can still see about 5% of patients almost have greater than 5 diopters out from the optimal, basically, outcome as well. And we've seen successful improvements on accuracy of our cataract surgery, and we've seen this with improvements in intraocular lens formulas, and we've seen this from multiple audits. And the idea is that now cataract has transitioned from a therapeutic procedure, which is what we were probably doing in the 80s, to much more to a refractive procedure now, where we're trying to push the limits of what we can basically give our patients. So it's no longer the fact that I can put a lens in, you can wear a pair of glasses, and you can see well. The concept has basically changed now, and we're really pushing the barriers basically to be able to push this limit of what we can actually achieve. And in order to do this, you need to have an accurate formula of a calculation of where your basically lens is going to basically sit itself. And you can see that from single formula optimization, which a lot of us basically try to do. 1% of people can get about 92% accuracy within half a diopter of basically of accuracy. Now, if you look at the errors in basically outcome of when you're basically doing standard intraocular lens surgery, you will see there are two large areas that basically gleam over here. So one is the axial length measurements that have improved with optical biometry. And the second is basically your capsulorhexis. Now, of course, as Sheetal basically has shown you, now there's masses of technology to improve your capsulorhexis. So if you have access to a femtosecond laser, of course, you can eliminate this down with supreme levels of basic accuracy. And optical biometry is certainly basically improved thing. So if you look at the other big area, this leaves your basically IOL, basically, or IOL calculation to where you basically have the largest area of inaccuracies when we're looking at this. With respect to IOL inaccuracies, what we're basically all concerned about and try to improve is our effective lens position. So if you can predict your effective lens position after surgery, you're going to know exactly how to calculate your biometry. And there are lots of reasons which I'll show you why this is going to basically be difficult to do when we're putting lenses in the bags. All of these factors we know are going to affect your basic ELP. So you can do a lot of work on formulation, and the new Barrett formulation, which is what I use for a lot of my surgery, is very, very good. But you still get a standard deviation and a variation. And all of these parameters have to be much tighter if you're doing premium IOL surgery with a multifocal or trifocal technology. But you cannot have that standard deviation in your outcomes because your patients are going to be unhappy because they paid for basically better surgery. This just shows you two patients of mine I did recently, and Dennis captured this for me from the ZA. You'll see these two patients, routine cataract surgery. Look at the difference in the thickness of the bag from one side to the other side. And we never look at bag sizes at all because we don't basically measure it. You basically measure this with the femtosecond laser when we're basically removing the lenses, but we never consider the bags when we're putting lenses inside the eye because what we're trying to do is not break the posterior capsule and put the lens inside the bag itself. But clearly, if you have a larger bag, you're going to basically have a different effect with a lens that's a 2-base or a 4-base haptic than one basically with a smaller bag. And it's going to have a difference on your outcome. And you can see this with the AC depth basically on the left-hand side compared to one basically on the right-hand side over here as well. So you've got to think about this when you're putting your lenses inside the eye and how this is going to basically affect your patient. And I'll show you this with an example here. So this is a 68-year-old lady who basically had blurred vision in both eyes, so she has bilateral cataracts.
No past medical history of note, so 3+ NS cataracts. Basically, frontal examination was normal. One of the trainees basically did a left eye phaco emulsification, put a good lens in, a Zebu lens and stuff, and got a pretty good visual acuity result. Okay, day 1 vision 67.5. At 1 month when she came back, she was complaining of photopsia and a streak of light around basically a light source. Now, her best corrective visual acuity is pretty good. The streak was still present with basically full correction, and she complained there's no difference with basically good lighting or basically poor lighting, so mesopic or basically scotopic. So as most trainees will do, they say, just wait, come back in 3 months, see somebody else. So they basically brought her back in 3 months' time, hoping somebody else would see her. Unfortunately, she went back to the same resident, and he basically complained about the same things, right? And she's not a demanding patient. She's just basically complaining she's seeing basically a streak. So someone else more senior basically saw her at that time. They said they thought that she may be having some aberration basically problems. They weren't really sure of the cause, but this is a good lens. It's an aspheric lens over here that she put in. And she refused to have surgery in the other eye with a 3+ nucleoscopic cataract because she was worried that she was going to get the same thing in this left eye. So then they basically sent her to my clinic to basically have a look. What you can basically see is now 4 months post-ops, you can see the streak here on the retroillumination is much more easy. Much difficult to see on this side over here, but you can see basically on this side as well. And I looked at basically the aberrations. You can look at the topography, maybe some little bit of steepening on the side over here, but essentially her spherical aberrations and her coma essentially is exactly basically the same, and corneal astigmatism was same on the surface itself, okay? So basically I spoke to her. Luckily they didn't yag her, and I said, look, this is the situation, basically, and I said this is probably related to the size of your capsule when you had your cataract surgery. This is a 2-foot plate lens, and basically it's not stretching it out enough, and the capsule's now got basically a crease over here. So I wasn't 100% sure whether it was a capsule here or basically whether this was a fold in the lens or the lens was damaged basically during the lens insertion. So anyway, what I did was I took her back to OT to have a better look, and in fact, actually, this fold was actually in the posterior capsule. So I moved a little bit with the crease by adjusting basically the lens position. And when she came back, she says she sees basically better. You can see the large fold is gone, but she does have some little folds basically on the side over here. And now she said after repositioning, she now only sees it basically at light. So I said to her, look, don't worry, I didn't have to do a lens exchange. I can just basically yag this basically later on. But now she knew that there was a problem because we found out what the issue was. So she said, I'll tell you what, let's go for the other eye surgery. What are you going to do for that side? So I said to her, well, okay, let's avoid this situation completely, and let's clip your lens basically to the anterior capsule. Then I don't care what size your bag is because it's not going to make a difference with my surgery. So typically I'll use the Z8 for the cataract surgery. So as Sheetal mentioned, you can have different variations in the height. I use 400 microns basically for my settings for your anterior capsule, and you'll get a free-floating capsule pretty much every time. And for the corneal incisions, typically they will program 2 for me, 1 either side, basically when I use this basically lens. So you can see this is basically just lifting up basically the capsule viscoelastic, and then we basically take the lens out basically in your normal manner. And then what we'll do is that once we basically put the lens in, inject it basically into the posterior, into the capsule. And typically when you're basically injecting the lens in initially, I sort of inject it and I wait a little bit and allow it to basically open by itself. So this is the lens. I check to basically make sure the haptics are basically on the anterior side. This is an injector that we got from Swiss Med and Transmedica that gives to use the lens with itself. So I'm just checking to see make sure the flanges on the anterior surface, which is important to basically check that. Then gently basically put it in position with the OVD in place. And then you see I inject and I just wait and let it basically open up by itself. Now once the lens is basically in the capsule, what I then do is that I will then remove the viscoelastic, and typically I will use a cohesive viscoelastic basically over here to make sure I can get all the viscoelastic out from outside, from underneath the lens itself. And I have intraoperative OCT and OT as well. And I can check to make sure the posterior capsule has collapsed basically behind the lens itself. So you can go underneath the lens, or I can just gently rotate the lens. Then I put a bit of viscoelastic on the anterior surface. Now, if you do bimanual, of course, you can just put an irrigation in on that side. And then you can see I use a side port that's created with the laser to flip up the haptics basically over the anterior capsule, typically starting with the larger ones first of all, and then you can rock it either side and then basically do the smaller haptics on the surface. And all of these capsules that I will show are all being created with the Z8 femtosecond laser. You can do it manually. I have done it on a few cases manually, but you have to be very accurate with your centration basically when you're doing a manual capsulotomy itself. And then typically I'll put a bit of Myostat or Myocol inside the eye to bring the iris down. I think it's worthwhile just to make sure that the haptics are nicely in place and there's a gap there between the haptics and the IOL. Okay, So just a little bit, this is my only slide on capsulorhexis because I'm not going to really talk about the Z8 that much, but obviously we did a lot of work looking at the Z8 capsule itself, and the reason why Z8 gives you one of the best capsules, it's the only femtosecond laser that actually has a spiral pattern when it's basically creating. And if you look at this on SEM over here, this is the SEM basically from the Z8. You can see a very smooth surface on this side, which is very similar to what we basically showed in our paper compared to a manual capsule. And this is basically from the catalyst, and this is basically from the Victus. And the reason why you get these lines there itself is because the Victus and the catalyst are firing in a vertical firing pattern. Okay, I mean, you can get some of our papers there. We explain this in a lot more detail on why you look at the capsule formation, and we show the strength of the capsule is pretty good with this firing system. This is my only slide on the Z8. Okay. So back to the case again. So we look at the case. So she's 6'6", basically unaided in the right eye. Left eye basically done on the YAG. You can see on the UBN the difference in the lens position here on the right side with the FEMTIS on this side over here and the posterior chamber intraocular lens over here itself. So after the YAG, of course, there was no more line. She never had a line on the right side, and she was obviously basically much happier with basically the result. And the other thing to look at is look at the effect of the tilt. Okay, or the lens. Even though she's got a good best corrective visual acuity, and the tomography basically was showing only about 0.4 of adapter, you can see she's an induction of almost adapter of cylinder in the left eye, and nothing basically, or basically 0.2 or 0.3 on the right side itself. And this is because obviously the lens is fixated on the right side on the anterior capsule, which is not basically on the left eye. And this is related to the size of the back. I mean, if anyone in this room puts their hands up and tell me they actually measure the back side, I'll be very impressed. Okay, because most of us basically don't, to be frank, and because we don't basically look at it, you just want to look at the density of the lens itself. So we're getting less basically lens-induced astigmatism as well. Okay, so I'll show you another case. So this is a 56-year-old male Singapore Airlines pilot. Okay, so obviously probably high visual demanding. So he was complaining of triplopia when he saw one of my colleagues. Best corrective visual acuity was good, 2+ nuclear cataract. He was under the glaucoma service with bilateral ocular hypertension. He underwent cataract surgery by one of my colleagues. She put a CT Lucia lens in, so another good quality basically lens. She's a good cataract surgeon, completely routine, unaided visual acuity 6.7.5. 1 month, he came back at basically 3 months comparing basically halos at dim light and seeing a shade on the side of his vision. Now, of course, his vision is very perception. He's a pilot, right? So he's going to pick up these things quite easy itself. So she yagged him, okay? And then basically you can see his visual acuity, his best corrected is still pretty good. And then she waited on that find. He still basically complained of symptoms. This is basically post his YAG. And 12 months, he's still basically complaining of the same thing, shadowing in his vision on both sides. Corrected visual acuity is 6.6. So I just want to show you basically obviously what he had. Most of you probably know sitting in this room. Of course, he has negative and he has positive dysphotopsia. And this sort of picture over here describes to you basically what this whole phenomenon of negative dysphotopsia is itself. And basically it's a shadowing, typically in the temporal basically field where you get an arc, where you get a negative basically effect over here, because you get a difference between the internal reflection of your light that's giving your photopic, your positive of a dysphotopsia versus your negative where you get a reflection coming around the outside of the lens and the area outside the lens where it's basically not basically being refracted. And that's why you get this negative back band in the field itself. Now over time, we know it can get better because of course you get fibrosis, right? So if you get fibrosis around that area, then basically this will seal off and then you won't get that internal reflection itself. But clearly in this situation, it didn't basically work itself. And normally it is one of the most common complications after what we consider perfect surgery. So you do a routine procedure, you got perfectly good capsulorhexis, and yet patients will still complain of this. And you can see the reduction goes from 15% normally about 1 month down to 3% at 1 year, because normally you'll basically get that fibrosis around that area itself. So, of course, that was the answer to his problem. He's got a basically dark shadow arc. He's got a well-centered IOL. But if you look at the picture over here and also on retroillumination, what you'll see is there's actually no fibrosis. And that's what I noticed when I first saw him. And I thought, okay, this is why you're basically getting this issue. But he's got a well-centered IOL and a good anterior capsular covering. I sent him basically for a UBM, and you can see there's a slight tilt basically after she did the YAG, and it basically brought a little bit of basically a bit of vitreous basically forward behind the lens itself. So the management, of course, we can do IOL reverse optic capture. You can actually rotate the lens, change the position from basically down to 3 to 9 o'clock. That's been shown to improve the negative dysphotopsia. Of course, you can do an IOL exchange and change the refractive media of the lens. So I basically will start with something the simplest thing. So I said to him, look, I'm not going to rotate the lens because he's already got an open capsule at the back. Let's basically just do a reverse basically optic capture for you and see how you basically go with the symptoms. And actually, it was very simple to do because actually the lens just flipped out straight away as if it had been put in a week ago. And it was because he had no basically fibrosis there. So it basically came out quite easily, but he had a little bit of vitreous basically around the anterior edge, which I then took him back and I had to do a small anterior vitrectomy and clean that up. And his visual acuity basically improved on this side. And then we are left with, he said, so, okay, Jod, so what are you going to do on the other side now? And if you look in the literature, your options basically are to do a reverse optic capture as a primary procedure, okay, which you can certainly do. Okay, I said to him, why don't you try this lens instead? It works on a different technology. We can clip it basically to the anterior surface. Okay, so the lens basically is exactly the same. So I've already created the lens, the capsulotomy with basically the laser. Again, just basically checking with the haptics, with the positioning. I do this on every case. I think it's worthwhile just basically doing it as a routine thing to make sure you've got basically the flanges in the right position. It only takes a minute to do to basically check. The lens nicely sits basically in this pocket. Make sure you've got a good amount of viscoelastic basically over here itself so it doesn't get caught up with the injector. Again, inject and then just wait and allow the memory of the lens to basically open up. So as the basically memory of the lens will basically open up. Again, exactly the same as before. I remove the viscoelastic basically from behind, put a little bit of viscoelastic on the surface, but I say if you're doing by manual, you can just stick an irrigation on there, and then go through your second paracentesis to basically just flip up your larger haptics on basically the surface to get your capture, and then basically make sure you then do the individual sides. And it's worthwhile doing the myostat. Sometimes when you flick up one of the larger haptics, can get caught basically on the side of the iris. And then if you look at the visual acuity result, okay, so pretty good on outcome-wise. So this is visual acuity and refraction and stability. And he told me it's like having a completely different procedure. And that's what he says. He's saying to me, he couldn't believe that he had the same surgery in basically both eyes. And he had the other eye done by a very good cataract surgeon. So in summary, dysphotopsia, which you have to realize is the most common cause of routine cataract surgery. So you've done a good job, everything's gone fine, and patients are still unhappy with the procedure itself. It's important to basically recognize and not to dismiss it. It's difficult to predict with current basically technology that's available in any company, on any platform, with any current PCIOL, who's basically going to get it. Clipping of the lens to the anterior capsule can avoid this problem, both with negative dysphotopsia and enhanced refractive optics, and reduce positive dysphotopsia itself, independent of capsulotomy variation, and it can improve your accuracy of your effective lens position. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Jod Mehta. It's a very interesting presentation on using these FEMTIS intraocular lens with the femtosecond laser in creating the capsulorhexis. Any questions from the floor?
Thank you so much for your case. I feel like it's fated for me to be here because I have exactly the same patient. Primary lens that was inserted was a Teleon lens, and she described a negative dysphotopsia just like this. So now she's 1 month post-op. She's very unhappy with that shadow. So what should I do now? Should I go in and do a optic capture for her?
So I would do, she's only 1 month post-op, and so I would do reverse optic. I mean, the tricky thing with reverse optic capture is that if the capsule is not centered well, then when you flick it up, you may find that it doesn't basically sit properly. But if there's been no YAG, I would go for reverse optic capture first of all. The other thing you can do, remember, she's already a month down the line. You could look at the haptics, you could rotate it to 3 to 9 o'clock position as well at the same time, which is worthwhile. It's amazing how easy it is. When I flicked out that lens, it was a year down the line, and it took about 5 seconds. I was shocked about how easy it came out, but it shows you how lack of fibrosis there was in that capsule, even at 1 year. So I would do that for them. I would change the position, 3 and 9, and also basically flick it up.
What lens was the initial surgery? Comfort. So this is a plate haptic lens. Prof, may I ask how do you actually do the reverse capture on a
That's going to be a little bit more tricky if it's a plate. If it's a plate haptic lens. What's the positioning of the feet? Is it 3? Is it 12 and 6? 12 and 6. So rotate it first, because you can easily do it in 1 month. So plate haptic lens is difficult, but you're not going to be able to basically do reverse optic capture. No, it's the lenses that we do them with 2 feet haptics.
Yeah. If it's a three-piece or single-piece lens, C-loop lens will be much easier to do an optic capture.
Yeah.
Right?
But I would rotate it first, see how she is. If the symptoms go, sometimes it moves, you see. They'll say to you, the shadow is moved a little bit and stuff, and she may be okay with that. If she's not okay, otherwise, then you may have to think about doing a lens exchange and then put basically a lens either in the sulcus or do reverse optic capture.
We have a catalyst in where we practice in Damansara. I've tried also putting in the FEMTIS. My technique of doing FLACS is my CCC is quite large. It's 5.5 because I do a supracapsular phaco or FLACS. I find with the 5.5 it's a bit too big for the horizontal haptics. I have difficulty stabilizing the lens. What's the smallest CCC for the or the biggest? Sorry, the biggest CCC for the FEMTIS possible.
So the thing is, you have to also bear in mind that the size of your capsule that you create, there's a difference between obviously what you program on the lens and what happens in reality. And the reason why is because your anterior lens capsule volt will vary from case to case, right? Yeah. So sometimes if there's a very high volt of that anterior lens, you'll see that the actual capsule that you'll get will basically be much larger. Most of the eyes, I don't go above basically 5.2. I always basically aim for 5. In fact, I mean, the first case we did, Dennis, we did like 4.7, right? So 4.7 is a little bit small to do, right? But I mean, we basically try to aim for 5, but you're exactly correct. Because if you aim for 5.2 or something like that, and it's a high volt lens, your effective capsule actually is bigger, which means that you get the big ones out, but the two small ones, you're going to not basically get so well, basically, either side, and there's a risk that you won't get. So, I mean, it's still pretty reasonably centered because of course you've got the two larger haptics there, but it's not like perfect with the nice thing around the edge. So I mean, I'd make it a little bit smaller basically, and I still think you'd be able to do the surgery because you can judge it by, you know, when you look at the OCT beforehand, look at the anterior lens. That'll tell you how much you're going to get.
Would it be a problem not to lock the horizontal haptics and just support it by this upper and the lower haptic?
So my experience, most of the time I'll try to lock all 4, okay, when I do it. I've done cases where I've just locked 2 and it's been fine.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
My question is, would it be a challenge to remove the OVD from the back of the intraocular lens? And when do you remove it?
So I do it at the time of implantation. So I implant first, and then I just remove the OVD. And like I said, I'd use a cohesive viscoelastic, and I'll either rock the lens from side to side, or I'll just go underneath and take the viscoelastic out. And then that will allow to make sure, it just makes me feel that I've taken out everything from behind. And then I put a little bit more OVD in the anterior side, yeah. And then I clip it. But if you're doing by manual, you can just put irrigation in at the same time, and then just do it one-handed with a Sinski hook to basically clip it. But I don't know whether it's essential to do that, but I mean, that's what I do. And I just thought, you know, it's just good that you don't make sure there's no viscoelastic behind the eye and stuff.
All right, but, yeah. Thank you.
Rotating the lens to 3 to 9 o'clock hours will reduce the dysphotopsia. Yeah, and do I need to, like, if it's better at that position, then in my future cataract, I just shift everything to 3 to 9?
So there's a whole discussion on how to manage dysphotopsia and stuff as well, right? Okay, so the idea has got to do with internal reflection, basically on the lens itself, and some of the evidence. I mean, the evidence on even the material is it's not that strong on there. That if you basically use silicone, most of us are using obviously acrylic lenses now and stuff, right? So even if you use silicone lenses, there's supposed to be less risk of basically having this. And this whole phenomena came about because, of course, the edges of the lenses were changed to like square edging effect and stuff to reduce the PCO rates. So we reduced the PCO rates, but we invented another like basically side effect. So the 3 to 9 o'clock just comes basically from literature, basically looking at larger series where it seemed to be less, and people have tried rotating it. And it's a small thing to try to do itself, and I think that's why they basically tried to do it. But it's got to do with the internal reflection and the beam of basically where people notice the temporal and nasal field. And maybe it's the larger area of the haptic that's blocking the light in that area to reduce the negative dysphotopsia, like I showed in that schematic, where you're basically looking at a large beam. It's that gap there, that's what's giving them the temporal arc.
Incidence of pigment dispersion with this lens, because the iris would be in contact with the haptics.
Yeah, so I give my stats straight away, and that's why I showed the UBM, and most of our patients are Chinese, so they obviously have thick irises and stuff as well, but I haven't seen any cases from there itself. But I definitely think it's worthwhile giving something myotic at the end of surgery, because sometimes when you flick it up, like on the thing, that second case, it did go a little bit more anterior, and then I just gently basically pushed it back. But it seems that once you do it and it's in position, you're giving them myotic outside surgery, it seems to basically be okay. But I do that routinely, so it's worthwhile doing.
Any more questions from the floor? Otherwise, I have 2 questions for you. Since now that you are putting the lens a little bit at the more anterior to me, in my understanding, which is hooking it on the anterior capsule. So do you need to make any changes in your biometry? That's number 1. Number 2 is, the lens is a little bit more anterior now. So will there be a gap between the lens, a bigger gap between the posterior aspect of the optics and the capsule, and that may will it means there will be higher incidence of PCO?
Okay, so I mean that's a good question. So the second one first. So I mean we've been using it for a few years, so I haven't really got a lot of data, but certainly from the data and literature, there doesn't seem to be higher rates of PCO from there itself. And in fact, if you look later on, the posterior capsule, when you see them in the clinic, actually collapses back down basically against the back of the lens itself. But I think that the point we made about the viscoelastic removal is quite important. The second thing on the biometry calculation, well, so we haven't had to adjust it because you're going to get, it's almost like the A constant that you basically were told to go with, and when we looked at the outcomes, actually was very accurate. And that's exactly the point, because every single case you can put exactly, you know where it's going to basically be, which is not the case when we put lenses in basically in the capsule, because the lens position is going to vary. So your biometry, certainly you can personalize it, but you'll be able to see that you're going to be pretty close straight off the packet because it's predicted to basically be in that specific area. Now the counter argument would be is that what happens if I don't clip it? All right. So what happens if I inject it and I put it inside the bag? Sure. So then I think there will be some slight difference in the bump because your lens then is sitting back like any other posterior chamber lens that we use because the position you've altered it there itself. And certainly if you've optimized your A constant for the lens to be in that anterior capsular position, then even a little bit of movement is going to have an effect. So then the counter argument will be then basically true.
All right. Thank you very much. Any burning question from the floor? Yeah. If not, then we will proceed to, I would like to invite the third speaker of the day, Dr. Benjamin from Philippines. Please welcome Dr. Benjamin.
We're going to go very quickly through literature and understand why it is important to correct not only your presbyopia problem, but your astigmatism as well. I found this article, which is probably the largest study, a systematic review on the global prevalence and economic humanistic burden of astigmatism in cataract patients. So they basically looked at the pre-existing astigmatism of the cataract patients. You'll see that the literature search for Embase and Cochrane and everything found 3,600 plus citations, and they reviewed the 31 articles from 32 publications. And this is what they saw. Your pre-existing astigmatism for your cataract patients range all the way to 47% in some studies from China. And these are different countries, Italy, the UK, Denmark, all the way down. And the lowest, apparently, pre-op astigmatism is somewhere at 23%. Out of all those patients, and normally when we do have astigmatism, you normally say, oh, it's not that important to the patient, or maybe it's not that high, so I don't have to correct it. But if any of you here have astigmatism, you will realize if it's not on your spectacles, you're not very happy. And yet we tell our cataract patients, well, you can just do without it and maybe wear glasses again after surgery. So here we have they divided it into mild, moderate, and significant, and you'll see how high the percentages are. And it is quite significant because they considered mild as a 1.5 diopter. I think we all try to aim for something that's 0.5 diopter or less. So if they do have anything above that, we should be correcting them, and yet a lot of the time we don't. So we talk about this whole afternoon about spectacle independence or getting your patients happy without anything, no need for spectacles after surgery. And here are several studies on that in this review. At 1 month post-surgery, spectacle independence for those who had relatively higher patients receiving toric IOLs, 97% of patients compared to those who just received a spherical IOL. And that's about 50% of the patients. At a 6-month follow-up, 24% of patients with toric IOLs still required some type of glasses, but it was as high as 64% for the spherical IOL group. So that's a very large difference. Again, another study on RCT, pre-surgery, 85% of patients with toric IOLs, and 80% of patients underwent some corneal relaxing incisions. At 3 months post-op, 15% of those toric IOL patients required distance vision correction compared to 3 times as much for the spherical IOL. So that's a huge difference. It goes on here with other studies, and you'll see that all of them are statistically significant. That putting in a toric IOL to correct your astigmatism at the time of surgery actually results in better quality of life and a better, happier patient who's basically a spectacle independent patient. Now, what's interesting is the high prevalence of the pre-existing astigmatism in cataract patients actually also produces an economic burden, because post-operatively, they will still continue to see their eye doctors or their optometrists. And if you say that they're retired anyway, well, there's someone who's going to have to take them there. So there's also a drop in your labor force for a certain number of times and certain number of follow-ups. When they checked what this economic burden would result in, they found out that spectacles over the rest of the lifetime of your cataract patients who just received spherical IOLs is anywhere from $2,151 to $3,440 in the US, and $1,786 to $4,629 over the rest of their lifetime. This is in dollars, in post-operative corrective spectacles. So if you look back, if you had given them the toric IOL, they would have spent less. And yet every time we talk about premium IOLs, we tell our patients, well, you're going to spend a lot more, just wear glasses. You actually are dooming them to more expenses rather than getting the correct grade for them. I think we're all familiar with the structure by now of the lentis IOLs. It's very unique, and we've shown this in previous talks. And you can see the range here. See the range of the toric IOLs. The sphere will go from 0 to 36, and the cylinder from 0.5 diopter to 1,000, 10 diopters of correction. So you can't even say that, oh, your toric problem is too high for the implantation. So that's the usual normal IOLs you're thinking of. But lentis is allowing us, Teleon is allowing us all these probabilities for the patients. And these are the studies done by a lot of the authors who have been using the lentis platform. But I'd like to share with you a series of patients that I've done over the past pandemic era here, when none of us could see each other in person. And here was the purpose of my review. I wanted to find out if you have patients who are presbyopic, extremely high errors of refraction, and they want to be spectacle-free, finally, whether it's a clear lens exchange or they have cataracts. Then you have to now find a presbyopia-correcting IOL as an option, but there are no readily available IOL powers for them, and hence you need customization. So I reviewed my patients from 2019 to 2022, did our regular cataract workups, and when you're trying to find out now what to do exactly for your toric patients, you go to teleon-toric.com, and you will see this form. You have all your data, so you just punch it in. You enter your name, patient, etc., and the kind of IOL that you want. If you want it for nearer vision, you can have the M+ toric, or M+ X toric, or if you want something for a mix and match for maybe an extended depth of focus for them, you can go down to a 20 or a 15. After you punch it all in, you can have the option of violet light filter, and you can even have a standby option for your implantation. In our country, it takes about 3 weeks in the Philippines to get in. So I just tell my patients, if you're seriously considering this, then I'll start ordering it and getting it along the way. They also know that ready-made IOLs, or the ones readily in stock, are not going to be good enough for them. So they're willing to wait a lot of the time. So most of the cases were either done by phacoemulsification or FLACS. And here's the profile of the patient data. So I'd like you to take a look at the degree, the degree of pre-op refraction here. We're talking about 925, 950, 1450, 1175. And then there's just really one off-the-chart patient who's hyperopic of 1050. And all his life, since he was 20, he was the subject of so many conferences in so many departments, and everybody said, we can't do anything for you. Right? So he's now 62, and she's still being told nothing can be done. Your power is just so out of the way, we can't do anything for you. So about half these patients had some amount of cataract. The other half decided for clear lens exchange, and that's because, like, for example, patient ED there had 1,600. Oh, here had practically 2,000 worth or 20 diopters worth of a spherical problem, and he was just willing to have a clear lens just to get better all his life. In fact, he said he went through high school not really seeing anything, but his father kept donating to the school, so he kept passing, but he couldn't see anything. Funny story for him. Anyway, The table 2 here will show your post-operative results. Now, I just put the post-operative spherical equivalent because you saw the degree of cylinder correction that I needed. And even if you convert that spherically, you would end up with a much higher spherical equivalent than this, right? Because they had cylinders of 600. That should be maybe 300 if I didn't correct it properly. And here you have very good uncorrected visual acuity, both for distance and even near. Okay? Now, there's something else I have to tell you because you see these numbers seem to be a bit high, average of 100 nearsightedness. The 300, a patient informed, this is the guy with the 2000 grade, and the myopia could really not go down. It was like 0 was the lowest grade possible. I told him he might need glasses for this, but he was so happy. He said, I've never seen, this is the guy who went through high school passing without seeing a thing. He said, I've never seen as clearly as this, so he didn't mind the minus 300 at all. Now, something I have to tell you about this, because once you start using Teleon type lenses, a lot of people will do an autorefraction right after, and they'll say, oh, I think I missed it. Why is my patient 150 myopic? And yet you see the uncorrected acuity is still practically 20/20. The reason for that has been established, and it's actually a study on autorefraction versus manifest refraction. It actually finds, and you'll see it here, the AR and MR, there's about a minus 1.28 that you will see because they did the study and they find, okay, that actually there is a pseudomyopia produced. Because remember that it's a bisegmental lens. So the AR was not meant to, find out if it's a bisegmental lens. So it gets a grade, on the top and on the bottom, and roughly the difference between the two, let's say it's a minus 250 from the top side of the segment to the bottom side, and it gets half of that. So you get the minus 125. So the results I just showed you means that the spherical equivalent actually ended up very close to plano. So it's just an AR problem that you see a minus 125. Okay, this is just one patient where I always used to tell, I told all my patients that, you have a plate haptic, like a lens is there, it's never gonna spin. I've never seen any IOL spin after I put it, it's toric lens, it's fine. So I saw her post-op, looked fine. On her left eye, however, here's the post-op refraction, and I put in a 400 and it's still there, right? So, okay, I dilated and this should be at 94 degrees. So it did spin. So now I always tell my patients, I never say never again. So it did spin, had to go back in. And about 2 days post-op, I saw her and it's gone down. Still some swelling, but it's down to minus roughly 0.87 or minus 1. And that still went down a few weeks later. There's a small but significant population of patients with very high myopia, hyperopia, and astigmatism who have been visually disabled, literally, for the majority of their lives and have been told that not much can be done to alleviate their condition. Refractive lens exchange is often possible, but the extreme powers needed to preclude the procedure from being done. So Teleon Lentis M+ presbyopia correcting IOLs in the toric configuration as well offer these patients the option of customization of their implants with excellent and very reliable optical results. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the very informative sharing. Any question? Does the autorefractor always pick up an average of the readings on the upper segment and the lower segment, or is it just in a certain portion? And does the position of the lens that you place, let's say if you put it lower, that it would pick it up less? Does that affect it in your experience?
In my experience, it always picks up the average because if you notice the design, there is sort of the inferior segment has a central portion, just a small circle there that allows you distance. But remember, the autorefractor is sending in a beam, and even if it maybe got the beam upwards on its way back, it could be, getting the lower segment. So I very rarely see like a plano reading. It's always a minus 1 something. At first, I just concluded this is what it's going to, get. And then I found a study that actually said that, yes, that's what's happening. So you're getting an average of whatever. For example, I put in a comfort lens, I'll get a minus 0.75.
If it is a plano, would you still think that it's still an average, or?
Oh, if I get a plano
Plano,
post-op, I hardly get a plano. I did on that hyperopic patient.
I see.
Because it was a plano with a little cylinder, but if you get the spherical equivalent with two, it was still plano.
Yeah. Because I get a mix of that in my practice. So I was thinking if it's an average, did the final refraction actually go off? That's why they're not reading that well, for instance. Yeah.
The best thing that I actually do is do a manual. You know, if for example they come in and they're seeing 20/25, 20/20, I don't even believe the autorefractor. Of course, it's there for presentation purposes, but if they're seeing so well, there's nothing to refract.
How about the target when you're selecting the lens itself? Do you aim for a first hyperopic or first myopic target?
I go as close to plano as possible, because sometimes your first myopic is yes. So it could be let's say a plus 0.1 versus a minus 0.3. I'll still choose the plus 0.1 because there's like a 0.32 or 0.4 difference. I'll still come as close as possible to it. However, if they're very highly myopic, I may on purpose aim for the first minus because they're so used to a closer distance of reading. But the hyperope, as I indicated on the table, he was so used to a plus 10 for far and a 350 for near. He said, I can read, doctor, but I miss the magnification. The letters are not just as big. So he was a little bit sad about that. Still happy that he was spectacle-free after 62 years.
I think when it comes to the autorefractor, whether it is a segmental multifocal implant or a diffractive multifocal implant, the reading is not as reliable as compared to a monofocal lens. So you cannot really rely and depends on an autorefractor when it comes to refraction for a patient with a multifocal lens implanted. That's my point of view. And when it comes to what, just now talking about the choosing the lens, if when I put this lens to the patient, if the patients prefer to have a much, if let's say I'll talk to the patient, counsel the patient, if the patient feel that they want, if there's an error, they will prefer to be still able to see far best compared to near, then I will aim for the first plus. Yeah, if they think what they want after the surgery is they want to see near better than the far, I'll aim for the first minus. Then the second eye I'll do some fine adjustment so that binocularly hopefully they can see far and near perfectly well without glasses.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, you'll realize that if you're using premium lenses, patients will always use binocular vision. There's always some neural adaptation and fusion that happens. So I really don't even mind anymore. Is this the dominant eye? Is this a non-dominant eye? You don't really know. He had a cataract to begin with. So in the end, you're actually probably flipping it back and forth. And it's just the neural fusion that makes them see better. So even if one eye at a time, it's 20/25, it can be 20/20 bilaterally.
In some studies, they have found that a residual myopia would lead to more halo and glares because of the defocus that it produces. So this is why a slight plus is preferable.
Can I just ask for toric lenses? I put my wound at 0 or 180. What's your preference to everyone in terms of your main wound? Do you put it at 0 and 180 or? Yeah.
Dr. Benjamin?
It doesn't matter to me. My wound, surgically induced astigmatism is minimal. So if there is some amount of maybe residual, even if it's your toric IOL, if I'm doing FLACS, I'll just correct it also with an arcuate incision. If it gets anywhere below 0.5, most of these patients will be happy nonetheless.
Dr. Sheetal?
Yeah, because we use Zeiss Callisto eye system for our toric alignments. And also now we have started using the LENSAR. So we, based on if we are using the LENSAR, then we actually don't use the blade. We make the incisions with the blade. We don't prefer to use.
You need to implant the lens.
No, I mean sometimes because if there are any corneal scars, and so generally we use the blade. So as he said that it really doesn't matter. Our minimum SIA also is very minimum within 0.3. So it really because the software of the LENSAR, when it gives us the marks, I showed the IntelliAccess marks, it does take into account the SIA, the surgically induced astigmatism. With the Callisto, when we use the Callisto, then also it kind of, it automatically takes the 180 degree from the preoperative limbal registration.
Right.
Yeah.
Prof, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I mean, so the point about doing 0-180, I know the reason why it's the correct thing to do is because your torsional effect, if you go on axis, is much more. We published this a long time back, maybe about 12, 15 years ago when I was a resident. And that's why you should do 0-180. Once you accounted for that, you'll see your standard deviation of your astigmatic control is much tighter. Whether you use, I use Callisto basically to do the alignment, but if you want to look at the outcome, 0-180, which is what you're doing, is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I always go for temporal 0-180 because this make your surgery more consistent, and your calculation will be easier. Every case you do not have to worry about chasing the axis of your astigmatism, your astigmatism. You just go temporal and do your calculation from the formula. And it become a very consistent things to do, Okay, so that's the end of the session. Thank you for joining.